Hello and welcome to today's video. It is on multicellular organisms. So the learning goals. First up, we have to understand that stem cells differ from other cells by being unspecialized and have properties of self-renewal and potency, as well as to recognize that stem cells differentiate into specialized cells to form tissues and organs in multicellular organisms. And thirdly, to recognize that multicellular organisms have a hierarchical structural organization of cells, tissues, organs, and systems. So please pause the video here and write your own version of these learning goals. Cool, let's get into it. First up, we have from 5.1, again the learning goal, and a whole bunch of key terms from your textbook, which you can either write down in glossary format or create flashcards, whatever it is to help you know and remember these terms. So let's get into it. This video is on cell specialization. That is how cells become tissues, how tissues become organs, how organs become systems, and systems become us. As in, how cells decide what kind of cell they're going to become. So let's start with stem cells. Here is an image of a group of human stem cells. This is what they look like. Now, stem cells are different from every other type because of two key qualities. As in the learning goal, they have the ability to self-renew. That means they can continuously divide and replicate. Self-renewal, as well as, secondly, potency. They have the capacity to differentiate into specialized cell types. These cells have potential to become, or have the ability to become, all of these types of cells and so many more. This is just a handful of the specialized cells that we have in our body. We have muscle, we have the sex cells, immune, epithelial, the nervous, the blood cells, the bone cells, adipose or fat cells, so many more. But all of these cells have the exact same DNA. They all started as stem cells. So we have to go back to the fertilization of the egg. And here we have the fertilization of an egg by a sperm cell. And this creates something called a zygote. The zygote is then going to make copies of itself, so that you'll eventually have just this ball of these cells. And this is called a blastocyst. And again, all of them have the exact same DNA inside of it. At this point, you could have a split between this cluster of cells. And that's one way how we have identical twins. But if we're going back to talking about stem cells, if we were going to collect or harvest stem cells, say at this point from the blastocyst, from this forming embryo, then we could. But when we're taking tissue from embryos, there's big ethical issues that we encounter. So that's why there's a lot of ethical debate surrounding the use of stem cells from embryos. But here we have totipotent and pluripotent stem cells. Potent stands for like potential and toti for total potential. So totipotent stem cells have the potential to become everything and anything. They can form a blastocyst and a human fetus. And they can also go on to form every other type of cell that we could ever need. As opposed to pluripotent stem cells, they cannot form a human fetus, but they still can divide and specialize or differentiate into all the other types of cells, just not a human fetus. So that's what distinguishes totipotent from pluripotent. So because this blastula is eventually going to, or this blastocyte, also called blastula, is going to eventually form an embryo and a new organism. Pluripotent cells just don't have the ability to become that, even though they can form into circulatory, nervous, or immune system cells. So once they have decided upon what cell they are going to become, then they are said to be unipotent. They can only divide into that same type of cell again, and uni being one. They are also said to be, at this point, differentiated or specialized. So from this, you might wonder, how do cells actually decide what they are going to become? Well, we have what is called gene regulation. So every cell, we've said, in our body contains the same DNA, but basically only specific regions of that DNA within the cell is going to be switched on. And that's what determines what kind of cell it will turn into, be that a nerve cell or a muscle cell. And those cues are called transcription factors. That is, it's either a protein or a chemical that's going to cause segments of that portion of DNA to make copies of itself. These factors, they tell which parts of the DNA to turn on and which to turn off. And that's something we either have covered or will cover, depending on what class you're in Unit 3 and 4 on gene regulation. So that's an introduction to stem cells and how they have the ability to just self-renew, to constantly reproduce themselves, and also this idea of potency. We have total potential, pluripotent, and then we can go down to unipotent, and that's once they're differentiated and they've become what they need to become. Okay, so moving on from 5.2, we have to recognize that stem cells differentiate into specialized cells to form tissues and organs in multicellular organisms. So the diagram from the previous slide, this one, it shows us that not all cells look the same or function the same, but it depends on which genes in the cells, it depends on which genes in the DNA are switched on by the appropriate transcription factors, enzymes, or chemicals. And here's a few real-life images of these cells, which, as can be seen and photographed through a microscope. So here we have muscle cells. We've got a couple of different types seen here. We have skeletal muscle that is attached to our skeleton that allows us to move and do things. Then we also have cardiac muscle, and that's the muscle that makes up our heart tissue. We know it's cardiac because these arrows, as you can see, they've got intercalated discs that they're called. Then we also have a nerve cell or a neuron, and you can tell by the branching nature of this. Then we have fat cells, or what is also called adipose tissue. And we have, can you guess what these are? They are red blood cells. And lastly, we have, guess what that is? Yeah, bone cells. As you may have picked up from here, when there is more than one type of the same cell working together, it makes up what is called tissue. So here's an individual fat cell, but when we have all these fat cells together, it's called tissue. They're also called adipose cells, so adipose tissue. Then we have cardiac tissue and skeletal muscle tissue. So cells with specialized functions, when they come together, they form tissues. Cool, let's move on. So lastly, from 5.3 of your textbook, we are going more down the line of this structural organization of cells, tissues, organs, and systems. So we've said when we have a group of cells working together, they are called tissues. And you can see from this diagram, when tissues come together, different types of tissues, they form an organ. And when organs come together, it's an organ system. When systems come together, that forms you and I, organisms. So here we have an image of muscle tissue. when different types of muscle tissue come together. So in the heart, we have cardiac, we have connective, we have nervous tissue, we also have epithelial tissue. Then it forms an organ, the heart. When various organs work together, so say here we have the circulatory system, because we've got the vessels, we've got the pump, we've also got blood, we've got red blood cells pumping around in here, as well as many other types of cells. Then we have an organ system, and lastly, when organs come together, we might be talking about the circulatory system and how it works together, well, the cardiac system, how it works together with the respiratory system to form the circulatory system. But then we can also have so many other different types of systems, such as the digestive, the excretory, the immune, the endocrine, the nervous, and so on. And they all work together to form an organism. And here is an image of an elk. For example, the muscular system is essential in allowing us to breathe because it causes our lungs to contract and relax, essentially just causing air to flow in and flow out. But then we also have all the other systems working together. And all of this complexity, this life, it begins with a single cell, a zygote that turns into a blastocyst. That blastocyst, which then develops into an embryo or a fetus, and that fetus into an organism. So it's also a good place for me to pause and point out these diagrams that we drew back in middle school and the models that you made, like, that's actually not really not even close. Hey, what animal cells look like. They look all different depending on which segments of DNA have been turned on and what that cell has become, depending on the transcription factors that have told it to become what it needs to become. Life is incredibly complex, but amazing. Talking about the beauty of life, let's look at some microscope images. So here we have, not a microscope image, another version of the different types of cells. Here we have a scanning electron microscope of bone marrow stem cells in the process of developing or differentiating into various types of red blood cells. And here we have cells from the trachea or the windpipe, and they are ciliated, meaning they've got these finger-like projections. And maybe you're wondering, why do we need these finger-like projections in our trachea? And if you've ever woken up in the morning and perhaps you've got like some mucus in your throat and you expel that or you swallow it, it's because these finger-like projections through the night are constantly working and bringing up debris from our lungs so that we can get rid of that. Pretty cool. Here, can you think about what this could be? It is an image of the eye of a fruit fly, also known as a Drosophila. A little bit unrelated to what we covered, but still pretty cool. And here, this is not an organism from a sci-fi movie. It kind of looks like the new Godzilla. Hey, it's a bed bug. This geometric kind of pattern is the surface of a kidney stone that is excreted out through the urethra. Looks pretty painful, hey, quite sharp. If you've ever heard of someone who has experienced the process of excreting a kidney stone, it's not a good time. And here we have an image of Salmonella invading human cells. Sadly and strangely beautiful. And that is all. So we have some homework. To read chapter 5 of the text, go over what we just covered. It's not a big chapter, you can knock it out pretty quickly, and add down key terms into your glossary or create flashcards. I want you guys to choose a TED Talk to watch. There are so many TED Talks on the topic of stem cells. Talks from people who are in the field, working in the area of cutting edge technology, science, and medicine at the moment. So simply type in TED Talk stem cells, and I want you guys to choose one of them. If you like extension, you can pause the video here and read this. It's taken from the textbook, and this is to do with the human endeavor of understanding science and navigating this emerging field of stem cell research. So to finish the video, just a couple of different ways to think about these things. So stem cells can turn into any cell they want, right? Adult stem cells, well, they can't form a fetus or an embryo anymore, so they're not totally potent. And in a way, just to get you guys thinking on the other side of this, hey. So I died waiting for embryonic stem cell research to find a cure. What about you? I was the embryo. There are massive ethical implications when it comes to stem cell research. I hope that in class, as you guys are conducting your own research, that you'll be able to look into these and even come to your own conclusions about what you think based on what you know. And that is all for this video. I hope that it has been informative, and with everything we do in class and with your readings, that you guys can get a firm understanding of this topic. So God bless, and I'll see you in class.